Well, I was born in Soviet Union in the city of Donetsk, which then was called Stalinland, which today is the center of the war or barbaric aggression of Putin against Ukraine. But in those days that I grew there, nobody could imagine that one day there'll be a war between Russia and Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine were like the base of this global friendship of people of this Soviet empire, the leader of the communist world, a very powerful country which controlled 1/3 of the world. And we grew without freedom because from the very childhood we knew that we cannot say publicly what we really think. And without identity. Being a Jew, I had nothing Jewish in my life. I knew nothing Jewish except from anti-Semitism. And the life was full of anti-Semitism. And then, after 1967, when Israel's victory was the big frustration, failure for the Soviet Union, Israel entered our life in a very powerful way, because all the world is looking at us and says, how you Jews did it. And you understand that whether you want or not, for the world, you're connected to Israel, and you don't know why. And you start reading in the underground and discover that there is a history, there are people, there is culture, there is faith, that you want to be part of it. Mm. And that's how I became Jewish activist, in fact Zionist. And this discovering of identity gave me strength to fight also for my rights, for the rights of the other people, for the freedom. That's how I became spokesman of two movements, Jewish movement and human rights movement in the Soviet Union. And then I was accused in being agent of American imperialism and spent 9 years in prison. And then, because of the pressure of all the free world, and President Reagan specifically, I was the first political prisoner who was released by Gorbachev, and then spent 9 years in Israeli government, and then 9 years as the head of Jewish Agency. It's the organization dealing with the connection between Israel and diaspora Jewry. And have 2 daughters, 8 grandchildren. That are the great achievements of my life.
There's so many things I want to touch on here from what you just said, but let's start here. You said that you started looking at some underground literature. What is it that you saw? Do you remember a specific moment where you had this sort of sudden moment of realization that changed your thinking?
In fact, the realization that I have to hide my thoughts came very early. I was 5 years old when Stalin died, and my father explains to me, a 5-year-old boy, that it is, you have to remember all your life that miracle happened. Just as when we Jews were in big danger, Stalin died. It's good for us, for Jews. But he said, of course, don't say it to anybody. Do and say what everybody does. And I go back to kindergarten, and I cry together with all the children about death of Stalin. And I sing the songs about great son of all the people, Stalin. And I remember that miracle happened, Stalin died, I should be happy. And I have no idea how many children are really crying or how many are crying like me. And so that was the beginning of my life of loyal Soviet citizen. And that's when I learned that you're not supposed to say what you really think. And it was very uncomfortable feeling that you have to live with this self-censorship. But that's how loyal Soviet citizens live. And so I had no freedom, and I had no identity. As I said, there was no value in you being Jew, except that it means that there are restrictions, discrimination, and so on. It's nothing positive. But I discovered my identity through other people. When the victory of Israel happened, and they treat you as if it is your victory, and you understand there is connection. And then you start reading the books, and I remember the books like Exodus of Leon Uris, or the history of Jewish people of Dubnov. Suddenly you understand that there is a whole great history which doesn't start from communist revolution. It starts from exodus from Egypt, thousands of years ago. And it's so easy for you, it's so more natural to feel yourself part of that history and not the history of hiding your thoughts and being afraid of repressions. So that was one thing. On the other hand, when you are not afraid and you start speaking openly your mind, you can finally read the books which are describing the real Soviet life. You read Solzhenitsyn about Gulag, and you knew about it. You were whispering about it. It was like non-existent world somewhere behind, like ghosts are in this world. It's all people. Suddenly, yeah, it is your world. It becomes real through these books. Well, with the time, later, I became like an official spokesman, meaning that I was connecting the world of dissidents and the outer world. So using some diplomatic channels, some tourists and so on, I was getting different books which we were then distributing all over the Soviet Union. And once I sent a note to my friend in New York that sent us 100 books of Exodus, and we will make here Zionist revolution. Simply, the book about Jewish history was making such a big influence on people. They were suddenly discovering their own identity that I felt that it can change all the reality. And the same was, of course, about the books of Solzhenitsyn, the letters of Andrei Sakharov, and many other great books which we started reading through Samizdat.
So, you were kind of playing this dual role, right? On the one hand, you're working to kind of, I guess, kindle this sense of Jewish identity among Jews in the Soviet Union, of which, of course, there were a significant number. But on the other hand, you were also acting just as a general dissident, to anti-communist dissident.
Yeah, well, I have to say that when I became active in both movements, in the movement of the national revival of Jews, and at the same time with the movement fighting for human rights, there were pressure or warnings from both sides that you have to choose. Are you a nationalist or you a universalist? Are you concerned only about your own tribe or you're concerned about everybody? You have to choose. And I felt from the beginning that it's absolutely wrong. You don't have to choose. In fact, if I have strength now to fight for freedom, for human rights, for everybody, it's only because I discovered my own identity. And that is the source of the strength. When I was nobody, when I had no identity, the only value in my life was survival. That I learned from the very childhood that because you're a Jew, you must be the best in physics, mathematics, chess, whatever, because that's the way of survival. There are no other values but survival, but career. But when you do get your identity, suddenly you want to belong to something bigger than yourself. And then this desire to belong, to be with your people in your history, with your identity, that's something bigger than your own career. And then you feel yourself strong enough to fight for world values. So I always felt and feel until this day that this attempt to separate, divide between the world of identity and the world of freedom is absolutely wrong. The really full, enjoyable life is when people satisfy both desires, to belong and to be free.